Today, I am so excited for you to listen to this episode with Kerry Cavers, the founder of Moms Against Racism. By the end of this episode, you will have takeaway tools for anti-racist work that you can begin using in your homes and in your organizations. You will also learn alongside me about the word resilience and how it can be helpful or harmful depending on who you're talking to. Kerry is a visionary change maker. She's a fierce mama. She's the founder of Moms Against Racism. She's a biracial, Black presenting powerhouse whose life and work are rooted in justice, healing, and love. She's a strategist at heart with a heart. Kerry weaves political literacy, anti-racism education, and trauma-informed community care into everything that she touches, whether she's running a camp for BIPOC kids, interviewing amazing humans, or decoding white supremacy's grip on our systems. With a background in psychology and emotional intelligence, Kerry doesn't just teach anti-racist oppression or anti-oppression, she embodies it. She builds movements that are relational, rebellious, and rooted in collective liberation. She's not afraid to ask hard questions, burn down performative DEI, and reimagine a world where equity isn't just a checkbox, but a priority. What superpowers does she have? She has superpowers like storytelling that stirs souls, strategic thinking that shifts systems, and a deep ability to hold space, especially when the world feels heavy. She's raising anti-racist kids, building futures where everyone belongs, and reminding us all rest, joy, and righteous rage can coexist. It was such an honor and a privilege to speak to Kerry. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Camp Conversations. We are so excited to have Kerry here today. Kerry is the founder of Moms Against Racism, and I would love to start off by having you just do a quick little intro for us before we begin our conversation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me to have this conversation. As mentioned, my name is Kerry Cavers, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the founder of Moms Against Racism Canada. I also have a consulting agency called Acronym Consulting, and I come to this work, social justice work, inclusion, diversity, equity work, anti-oppression work, healing work, all of the things as a biracial, Black, cisgender, neurodivergent woman, mom. I have 3 kids, and I am a lover of psychology and human nature and why we do what we do. And so love to have these types of conversations. And myself and my family, we are grateful to be guests on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen people. So that is the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and bordering with many other nations in the area that is colonially referred to as Victoria, BC. And for me, part of how I want to be a good guest on these lands is having conversations like these and being able to shift awareness. I feel with my family and I, we live in such a beautiful area, and there's so much natural medicine around us, and we get to just benefit from that and from the stewardship of these lands long beyond memory. And so there's certain things I'm not a very good gardener. I kill most
Me
plants.
neither.
So, we each all have our strengths. And for me, this is how I can contribute to supporting Indigenous sovereignty and my acts of reconciliation of helping to hold some of those harder conversations. So
Mm.
I appreciate you inviting me today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction. And I just wanted to build on that by saying what led me to reach out to you, Kerry, is that the school that my children attend had an incident with racism. The school was not sure how to handle it. They tried handling it a few ways. No one really felt that it was handled in a way that really honored the victims or had a plan around how to move forwards. And they invited you in to run a workshop, and I attended that workshop, and it really helped me. It helped our community. It helped our school. And I loved how you approached things from a place of bias, because it really helped open up that conversation. And after the workshop, it opened the door to continue conversations without shame that sometimes seems to percolate around these conversations that causes so many people to shut down. And the focus of my work is around resilience. And I brought this to you and I said, hey, Kerry, I would love for you to come onto my podcast about resilience and talk to me about resilience. And I was going to open this question by saying, hey, can you tell me how you founded your organizations and your consulting firm? But first, I want to maybe let's jump into this resilience piece, because yeah, I would love to start there and help bring further awareness to me, further awareness to my audience.
Yeah, you bet. I would be happy to. And my um feelings and perspective around resilience is interwoven with how Mar came to be. So, well, I will answer two questions with one
Okay, perfect.
answer, if that's okay.
And MAR meaning
Oh,
Moms Against
yes,
Racism.
Mom's Against
Mhm.
Racism. Thank you. Yes, that's very important. We in the community, we just lovingly refer to it as Mar.
MAR. Okay.
Um, and so for me, like I grew up in a very white affluent town. And I grew up with my mom, who was white, a single mom, and my dad. I would connect with him. He was a part-time dad,
Okay.
essentially. And the town that I grew up in, for me, my experience was um, just trying to fly under the radar. Like when it came to the experience of being racialized, visibly racialized, and
Mm.
being one of the only like Black kids in my school for my whole school career, and I not having any Black teachers, very few racialized teachers, going to the grocery store and having whiteness reflected back to me, going to dance class, having whiteness reflected back to me, and all that throughout my life. And so for me, um, my way to get through life, the way to survive was to just kind of grit my teeth and fly under the radar
Mm.
until like we were expecting our first child. And I should say, like, with friends and people who um, were, safer to have those conversations with, I would definitely share experiences of racism that I had throughout my life. But when my husband and I, and he's white, and I will say the husband of all three of my kids, because I do get that question sometimes, because people
Mm.
are wonderful.
Mm.
I have three kids. Two are what we would say white presenting or white passing, and one that is Black presenting or racialized, racially ambiguous because of their dad being white too. So
Mhm.
genetics. Um, but when we were expecting our first child, um, that's when things changed for me, and I imagine that like a lot of moms, a lot of parents can relate in that, like, the you all of a sudden see the world in a very different way when you think about having this little being this to take care of. And so that's when it stops being about me and, just trying to get through, and now about like, okay, I need to make the world a better place, and kind of growing in that, and building that inner strength to take on these situations. And then fast forward a bit to May of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, and I had a bunch of mom friends reach out to me because I think their world had shifted too. They were now seeing the world through a different lens, and they wanted to learn how to raise anti-racist kids. How do we do this
Mm-hmm.
together? And so it was like a happy little accident that Moms Against Racism came to be. I just started a Facebook group because they were all asking the same question. I was like, okay, I'll just answer the question once and then we can all
Mm-hmm.
learn from each other. And I invited just a couple of mom friends, and then the next day there was 140 people in the group.
Wow.
And then in that first week, there was a backup of 1,500 people who wanted to join or who were invited to join, and then we've just uh, grown from there, grown very organically and in a way that we are prioritizing uh, like a decolonized way of doing things and an anti-oppressive way of doing things. And we don't always get it right, and that's part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that resilience piece in all of this comes through like my whole life based on being born visibly racialized. I haven't had the choice to not be resilient.
Mm-hmm.
So it has just been a daily, everyday, all around me, building that inner strength of how do I keep moving through these challenging situations? And so, for me and for a lot of BIPOC folks, there's actually, I think, a book. Oh, and I wish I could remember the author's name. We'll have to add it in or
Mm-hmm.
put it in the notes later. But that is like, Don't Call Me Resilient, I think is the title of the book, because we resilience is not in this way, in the way that we often talk about resilience, is not something that BIPOC folks really need to be exposed to or to have to build. It has been something that we have had to do out of survival. Um, and I often will relate it to like for because our group are mostly moms,
Mm-hmm.
and so for moms, that idea of well, I guess to back it up, like I think a lot of people, if you were labeled a hero, right, or a superhero, it would feel good. It'd be like, oh, you're a superhero. However, when that label is given to you as in a performative way or in a placating way to um what's the word I'm looking for? Like to rationalize not having your needs met, or to
Mm-hmm.
rationalize continued oppression and struggle and um, being overlooked, that
Mm-hmm.
title doesn't, it now causes pain or annoyance or frustration because your struggle is being invalidated and made invisible. So
Mm-hmm.
when moms are like, hey, I'm over here struggling, like with all of the demands that society has of like, do all of these things, and society comes back and says, you're a superhero, high five, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this does not
Yeah. And
fix
I'm
anything.
well, and I'm here. I mean, I hear I'm still a practicing therapist and clinical counselor in BC, and I hear a lot of that from moms, from teachers. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm burning out, I'm having a really hard time. And they're like, oh, well, but you're such a great teacher because you go above and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Or nurses, especially during COVID. And we try and appease it by giving this like really powerful label that we view as something very positive instead of saying, oh, wow, this is a whole connection based problem. This is
Mm-hmm.
not just a your problem. And that's where that resilience piece you're saying is that
Mm-hmm.
we're doing the same thing with it.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Because BIPOC folks, what comes up is like, oh, you're so resilient, and um, that gets glorified in a way that then like ignores the systemic root cause
Mhm.
of the problem, and like you said, shifts that onus onto the individual. And then when we talk about like self-care versus community care and those kinds of things, so for me the word resilient, I don't like it.
Yeah.
I,
Well, actually, and it really scared me when
mm,
after this conversation, because I was reflecting on my professional career as a teacher
mm,
and as a counselor. And as a teacher in the public school system, we were using the word resilient regularly. And when we're referring to resilience, we're referring to scaffolding towards challenges. So creating that ladder of challenges. And that was a very regular practice. Oh, this is a student that is struggling. And without any consideration for the struggle they have beyond the walls of the school,
mhm,
the regular approach we used was, well, let's scaffold some challenge. Let's slowly expose them to more and more so they become more and more capable of doing harder things.
mhm,
And the same thing in my training to become a counselor is we call it exposure therapy
mhm,
and regularly expose and resilience in my mind. And this is where I really appreciated our conversation is not exposure. Resilience, to me, what we're working on with camp is full from within, which in my mind is building belonging, building connection,
mhm,
building supports.
mhm, mhm,
And I not loved, it broke my heart to
mhm,
hear resilience described in this way. And
mhm.
it's fascinating that we can have one word that can be interpreted in so many different ways. And yeah, and it was a complete bias on my end coming into it.
Well, and I think like what you are describing to me feels more like liberation.
Mm,
Um, and like it's interesting. So much of our world is just a social construct.
hmm
It's just been made up. And so when
hmm
we look at um, even like in some ways, like your example of the child struggling in school,
hmm
right? And looking at, say, different neurodevelopment and different neurotypes. And we are pushing people in an unnatural way, in a socially constructed way,
hmm
to a norm
hmm
that has been decided by a dominant group of people with a whole lot of privilege. And
hmm
so when I think when we're asking about like building those things, right? Or working through the struggle or scaffolding, it's like to align with what,
hmm
right? To align with a world that is perpetuating oppression so that we can be okay with that?
hmm
Or are we wanting to build, like you say, those internal resources, that internal connection to liberate ourselves from these constructs to then be able to build a world where even the idea of having to scaffold like struggle wouldn't make any
Exactly.
sense.
Yeah, and you brought up this piece is when you had your first child, it really had this kind of reflective moment of how do I do things differently? What do we need to shift here? And I would say the same, um, because at the time I was working primarily with adults, and I realized so much of my work with adults was how do I help you lift the mask
Mhm.
and show you that you can belong exactly as you are? Because you're like the having to pretend and wear your mask all day is really causing some inner distress and turmoil.
Mhm.
And so when I had my first child, how do I help this little guy from never having to put the mask on? How do I show him that he belongs exactly as he is and that he's accepted and loved and safe exactly as he is? And how do I help build systems that bring that to life? Um, and so, yeah, I found a kindred spirit when I heard you share that story.
Yeah, and it's it not to be like trite. I think that might be the right word, but like psychologically speaking, and I imagine and correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that most adults are essentially like 8-year-olds walking around in like adult bodies with adult responsibilities because of all of that conditioning and all of that messaging. And oftentimes, like our emotional intelligence and growth and connection to self and authenticity and everything like that gets stunted around that age because that's when there's that cognitive development to be able to essentially internalize that messaging in a
Mhm.
different way. And so I think about on a world stage, all of the harm and the destruction that is happening. And it's essentially 8-year-olds running around with an immense amount of power, not having the tools to be able to work through why they're feeling the need to cause harm to other people, why they're feeling the need to have to take from somebody else or to, um, control somebody else. And it's this perpetuated cycle through hundreds of years, right? We know
Mhm.
hurt people,
Mhm.
that that this happens. And I we chatted before about the our love for Jen Lumenlin and her
Mhm.
parenting coaching in her book, Parenting Beyond Power,
Mhm.
and
And
just
her podcast,
and her
her parenting
podcast.
mojo.
Yes, yes, your parenting module, all the things, because so
Mhm.
much love. But her, for us with Moms Against Racism, like we do the book club with her book,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of different parenting advice out there, but not a lot that takes into consideration the impact of these oppressive systems like white
Mhm.
supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism, and how, for us, our tagline is doing the work starting at home, because
Mhm.
as parents, we are the first power system that our children interact with to learn about those power dynamics. And uh, are we upholding these systems and perpetuating these systems, or are we dismantling them and
Mhm.
building something different? And so, for this is where it continues, that cycle continues, and kids will either go out on the playground, and if they're not feeling like they have agency at home, or if their needs aren't being met, if they have their own purpose or their own power over their life, um, they're going to go out into the playground, they're going to go to school, and they're going to start using power over tactics to try and regain for themselves
Mm-hmm.
some semblance of control and safety in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just continues to grow and escalate. And so for, like coming back to the word resilience, and you know it's been used as a way to negate the real systemic oppression that BIPOC folks face. And I would say that we don't necessarily need to do more work in that resilience
Mm-hmm.
area. But for us, in my opinion, because we do carry, so much of that racial trauma and so much of that hurt and harm and all of that, we have a need for us to do our own healing of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we have been on that bottom of that power dynamic for so long, it w- w- there's no, if we're not doing our healing, if we're not addressing it, there's no way that we can't go out into other situations and blow that trauma and that harm through other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, for us, like that's our coming back to ourselves, like that path
Mm-hmm.
of working through that harm and
Mm-hmm.
learning that we have needs, and it's everything in camp, just like from the other side of the coin almost.
Mm. And you brought up a few things there that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
Um, One being, when I hear, my brain always connects everything back to practices that I've
Hmm.
learned. I
Hmm.
love to give people small takeaway tools. And something that I take away from your work, and something I take away from Jen Lumenlon's work, is that is almost a mindful based practice,
Hmm.
and which I find uncomfortable. I'm going to be fully transparent with that. I find it uncomfortable to do. But we all have bias, right?
Hmm.
And after I say this little bit, I would love for you to share a story that I had
Yeah.
bias around. And it's recognizing, as much as possible in the work of counseling, we try and acknowledge what is going on internally. So then we have some power over choosing whether or not we're going to trust that thought, whether or not we believe in it, whether or not it is worth our while, or we're going to let it go, take action, not take action.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so much of my personal work right now is recognizing when that bias comes in, noticing that it's there as a mindful based practice, and deciding whether is that something I trust, is that something I believe, is that something I need to learn more about, or is that something that is just old, like needs to be let go of. Do I
Hmm.
take
Hmm.
action on it, or do I not take action on it? And there's a lot of discomfort, shame, embarrassment, and disappointment that goes along with that, because I realized so much of that messaging comes from people I loved, people I trusted. And that's really uncomfortable work to do. And so if I hear, is that a valuable takeaway? Am I right in, I don't know if it's even fair to ask you that question, but um, I guess as a practice, that noticing the bias coming in, doing the work to notice the bias, I say them out loud to my children so we can talk through them together. And then talking about whether it's one we let go of or we don't let go of, take action on it. Have you, is that a fair summary of some of what you're saying?
Yes, yes, it is. I think the way that the world is designed right now, it is m more, uh, my words, I was gonna say more better. It
Mhm.
is if for those who have power to maintain their power, it's best when we're not noticing.
Mhm.
And so when we are just going about our day, kind of accepting, or like we get, I think it's like plus or minus 2 million bits of information coming at us at,
Mhm.
any given moment. And so when we shut off the noticing, then we are more susceptible to absorbing the messaging that is designed to keep us from being connected with
Mhm.
ourselves. And so that mindful practice of slowing down to notice and then naming um, is a really important one. And so the for bias, because some people will be like, "Oh, I took an unconscious bias training and I don't have bias anymore," and it doesn't work that way.
No, it's actually the
Uh,
polar opposite
it,
of like, oh no.
well, and for a good unconscious bias training, yes, it should have the opposite impact, because biases, all that they are neurocognitive shortcuts that
Mhm.
our brain takes, right? Because there is that so much information, and
Mhm.
so there's no getting rid of them, right? It's
Mhm.
how your system operates. What is important is what the programming you have to tell your brain which shortcuts to take,
Mhm.
right? And we have a lot of faulty programming based on what we've absorbed. Um, and so we walk around with these biases all the time, and we're doing them all of the time. And the the story that you were nudging at in connection to resilience, when we spoke the other day, I had shared about how for me resilience, I think, is something that like it is a skill for white folks to build, to be
Yeah.
honest. And that, so when we get into white privilege, there's a lot of confusion there for white folks who have had those struggles through their life. So usually that confusion comes from people who um, when we talk about classism, so people who have grown up at or below the poverty line
Mhm.
and are white, there's a real confusion about white privilege because they say, well, I didn't grow up with privilege, so I don't have white privilege. And so the distinction there is that they, were experiencing oppression under this system of classism, but under the system of racism that is based on, primarily skin color, there's benefits there.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking about building resilience, people who walk through the world um, being protected by their whiteness, there's a lot of um, opportunities to build that grit and that resilience and to work through those things because that white privilege protects you from so much.
Mhm.
And the story that I shared was we were down at the beach for the polar bear swim. And I am not a fan of cold water. I am Caribbean water. There you go. And
Mhm.
there were a couple of older white ladies that had gone in and we're sitting on the log, and my husband chose to go in and my kids were there, and my oldest went in as well. And then these ladies were giving me the gears about not going in
Mhm.
and how the cold water plunge was such a great way to kind of like build inner strength and this and that. And I just had this moment of like, look, ladies, you may need arbitrarily manufactured opportunities, like something so privileged with your
Hmm.
like down head to toe jackets for cold plunging in the ocean in this very
Hmm.
beautiful area. But I've had a lifetime of not being able to choose when
Hmm.
I have to be resilient. Like it's just a daily thing. And
Hmm.
so it was just this moment of like, oh my goodness.
Hmm.
Yeah, you do your
You
resilience.
do. And then, okay, then I want to build off of this
Yeah.
because in the moment you shared the story with me, and I was like, oh, reflection point. I am someone that has cold plunged. And so I was thinking about it, and right away, I think even your sharing of that story, which maybe some people listening will do the same, it triggered me
Mhm.
because right away I wanted to defend the two women and say, and defend my cold plant, like an activity I do, and say, no, no, everyone would benefit from it. And we don't know those two women's stories. Maybe they've had like really difficult traumatic events. Maybe they have had been faced with forms of abuse. Like we don't know their story. And so that could be our bias, like looking at them. And so the first thing I did was talk this through with friends, like unconsciously thinking about what friends I selected, but reflecting on it now, I picked friends that would also be the cold plunging white privilege that I knew would reinforce my bias again. And they're like, no, everyone benefits from cold plunge. Like, no, that's those two thoughts are completely separate. And we don't know the story of like those older women. And then I realized I did that. And so I started opening up this conversation with more and more friends and connections. And I started to hear back, well, there, that's your bias, is that you are looking at it as past experiences only. Whereas the BIPOC community, this isn't something that was in their past and that now that door is closed moving forward. And as simple as I live on the border of the US. And when we cross, my two children are very blonde little humans. And we can go into any town, and there is guaranteed to be at least one person that comes up to us and goes, oh, look at your beautiful little children. Look at their blonde hair, blue eyes. Look at that. And applaud us for that. There is never a safety risk around. And that in itself is privilege that continues for me, and fear and lack of safety that continues for the BIPOC community. And I just wanted to talk that through out loud because I think so many people in our audience heads would go right where mine did because it is a triggering, uncomfortable thought to have. And like you were referring to before, in the simplest terms, I say like that, not in my backyard.
Mhm.
Like it's just feels so much better to push everything out of my own backyard
Mhm.
and just keep it this little quiet sanctuary that
Mhm.
there's no bad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, like going back to that, like the noticing and the naming in this practice and being able to recognize and accept that we all have unconscious bias and we're all running it all the time. It doesn't make you a bad person. And I
No.
think because at least for the generation that I grew up in and the way that we were parented, I know that a lot of folks now are trying really hard to undo a lot of the harm that was caused. But I think a lot of us walk around with the fear where we've conflated the idea of being good and obedient
Mm-hmm.
and being nice and kind.
Mm-hmm.
And that for us, the messaging, I think, growing up as kids is to be good, right? Like we grew up in, at least I grew up in the time of like kids should be seen and not heard, and
Mm-hmm.
spare the rod, spoil the child, and like all of these kinds of things where it's like if you were bad, and what bad really meant was not obedient and like not and essentially just having needs and
Mm-hmm.
being a child,
Mm-hmm.
there was the threat of love and safety removed.
Mm-hmm.
And so now as adults, I find when we are bringing up these situations where like, I'm critiquing the resilience or sharing
Mm-hmm.
the story about these ladies, that it is human nature to do those protective mechanisms
Mm-hmm.
of like, but I'm not a bad person,
Mm-hmm.
right? I want to keep my safety, I want to keep my love. And if we can start practicing, like you said, slowing that down and noticing, like, oh, hold on, I'm running this thought.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And like, am I safe? What's going on? And just like getting curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the opportunity to replace that with something else.
Mm-hmm.
And then it no longer holds us back. And a lot of people, when we're talking about doing anti-racism work, approach it as this is a BIPOC problem, like a problem for BIPOC folks that we're helping them with.
Mm.
And what is really important to understand is that this conditioning, this like the white supremacy ideology and all of these other systems,
Mm-hmm.
it's holding everybody back,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's disconnecting everybody from knowing who they are and living their authentic, joyful selves.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing that, slowing down and that noticing, it may be something that's racially related. It may be something of like, when your kids are like, why do I have to do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
And you stop and you're like, why do they have to do it that way?
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that was just a message that was absorbed, and no, they don't need to do it that way. They
Mm-hmm.
can do it a different way, and everybody is going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There's a simple
yeah,
practice. I mean,
there's a simple practice.
right? Is just that just first piece of your work can start as
Hmm.
simply as being curious
Hmm.
with your everyday automatic responses.
Hmm.
And
And I just had to add to that because
yeah,
I want to make sure that I lost my thought a little bit. You brought me back,
sorry.
but no, 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 you brought me back. It was great. That with that noticing, because you had mentioned, and it hurt my heart a little bit about like bringing up that shame of like
Mm-hmm.
in noticing I had these thoughts and had these biases. You have been conditioned
Mm-hmm.
under these systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not a pass, it's not an excuse, but it's more of a permission to not go into those shame spirals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to put that ownership where it belongs. And then it's one of those things of like, now that you notice it, now you're a co-author in that. So
Mm-hmm.
now what are you going to do? Right?
Yes.
And so like we didn't have control over what we were exposed to as children, what we absorbed. But when we notice it, we do have that responsibility and that accountability to now do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's empowering and that's liberating. And we don't need to carry that shame with us, because sometimes shame is another conditioner that we've been taught, another way to disconnect, another way to be immobilized and to not grow in ourselves, and ultimately to not be able to grow in relationship with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, overarching of all of this, we believe that relationship is the remedy to to racism and to all of these systems of oppression. Because
Mhm.
when we can be, you know, um, building all of that internal strength and like internally liberating ourselves and living authentically, then we can show up in those relationships in the same way. And then we have those really healthy, reciprocal relationships that, for me, would build the world that I would love to see.
Mhm. And I think this ties to a question I hear a lot that I'd love to just give one simple practice to.
Hmm.
And it's so often when I'm working with professionals or parents that are dealing with children, how do we stop that shame piece from beginning so that we raise that generation that
Hmm.
isn't having to deal with that piece in addition to how we build proper relationships? And one practice that we regularly use starting so early is showing that individual that you're talking to first that I get where you're coming from.
Hmm.
And when I attended your workshop to help open the connections, the relationships right at the start, you did such a wonderful job of giving examples of why that, and you just did that with me right now, right? You're conditioned to think that way. It's, I get where you're coming from. Now let's talk about what we could change, what we could do differently, what we could try. But that first step, when you're interacting with kids, when you're interacting with adults, showing them that piece of, no, this isn't something to be embarrassed about. We understand where you're coming from. It makes sense that you're thinking this way. It doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean that we're
Hmm.
going to continue this behavior, right? But we understand where you're coming from. So, no, let's externalize that as the problem. And together, let's come up with a solution of how we can handle it or interact with it.
Hmm.
Mm. Um, just to tie it back to this resilience piece, I like how you are interchanging that word with, or this is my understanding of what you're doing with liberation. I like this liberation word and how liberation is framed around relationships and connection. And if I could tie it back to one more bias based piece that we just talked about at the start of this session, or at the start of our conversation, and we'll use it a bit of it as a closure, is I shared with you as well with camp, we're trying to do a one page, like easy to explain. And I said, could you look at this for me? And just so I'm sharing my framework. And you said, ooh, I have some thoughts on this right away. And I said, please to share with me your thoughts and let's do this publicly so that we can all learn together.
I love this. Yes. And it's I have a certain lens, right? And I will see things a certain way. And there's other lived experiences that I don't have,
Mm-hmm.
that like when I've put things out afterwards, I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally missed that part. And so for me, in looking at this immediately, what I noticed was on the one pager was that there was two, with the graphics,
Okay.
the two people pictured there were BIPOC.
Mm-hmm.
And so where for me this would become an issue is, and it's nuanced, right? So if there was only BIPOC people on the marketing, I'm going to assume that I'm going to be met with BIPOC people running this.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that mismatch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, like right now, there's been a lot of uh, growing awareness around the how important representation is.
Mm-hmm.
And representation 100% is important when it is authentic and
Mm-hmm.
affirming.
Mm-hmm.
And so this could be read when it's two BIPOC people, and if it was in on a website with a white practitioner, that this white practitioner thinks that this that BIPOC people specifically need this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that there's like potentially the white savior that is coming into here of like, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to save BIPOC people by helping them with this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so again, like those little micro moments of messaging
Mm-hmm.
to be aware of, and some people will be like, oh well, that's going too far, like I don't want to have to think through that. And it, again, it's in that basis of relationship and recognizing that that historical and ongoing impact and where you're coming from, right?
Mm-hmm.
I recognize where you're at. I'm going to meet you where you're at. And so even with something like this, like if you had a BIPOC person and like a white person
Mm-hmm.
represented here, that in a way speaks more of like this is, for all races,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the gender two binaries are pictured here.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that, but then also recognizing that if you are a white person and you are putting something out to BIPOC folks, that they will likely be interacting with that in a way that you maybe haven't considered.
Mm-hmm.
And because of different life experiences.
There's another piece that popped up for me too, that as you're talking, I'm thinking about as well. Um, and that is, well, one, when I keep hearing, for some reason, I'm drawing this parallel between what we're talking about as bias, and I'm drawing a parallel to intrusive thoughts, and how it's so much easier for me to talk, like think of my own experiences and being, when I have, especially becoming a mom, when I was worried about my kids'
Hmm.
safety, I had a
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
intrusive thoughts about that.
Hmm.
And that's easier for me to talk about than
Mm,
thoughts that still in my mind fall under that intrusive thought category, but are about other people or about the BIPOC community or about other communities. And so as I'm as we're sharing this reflection on this one pager that I'll share in the notes, and I'll share our edited version in the notes as well, um, with two BIPOC graphics, I'm now thinking that could also be interpreted, because you brought the white savior piece, as this is something to air quote fix, or the people that need support are the BIPOC community. And from my privileged place in creating this graphic, I've just picked two graphics. My
mhm,
care was hands over hearts,
mhm,
and my other care was the light bulb.
mhm.
Never a thought to what kind of person I was representing.
Well, and if
And
you want a further critique on it,
yes, please.
with the more female identifying person having their hand
Mm-hmm.
over their heart, and the more male represented person having the
Yes.
light bulb, it is also subconsciously perpetuating gender
Mhm.
socialization.
It is. It is. Mm,
And
thank
that's
you.
what I mean. Like we have been so deeply conditioned under these systems
Mm-hmm.
that unless we are slowing down and noticing and naming and getting curious and doing that practice, we
And
wouldn't notice this
connecting.
and connecting, right?
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't notice this. And then we
Mm-hmm.
put this out there, and people who are practicing noticing or just through life have had to notice to be
Mm-hmm.
safe would pick up on this. And other people, it would just reinforce what has already been told to them as
Mm-hmm.
how things are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that just really brings attention to, when we're working within larger organizations or larger systems, what messages we are reinforcing. Um, okay. I think I'm just really love this conversation. I love how we've been able to touch so deeply on well, no, we haven't. We've really just been able to touch on resilience and and really helped us all kind of reflect on how we're using the word, on how our intrusive thoughts are not to be ones of shame, but they're ones to spark curiosity, and that we can use a mindful practice to notice them and decide how to interact with them, on the value of relationships and connections. And do you think that there's anything that you would like to summarize or leave for my audience as a
Mm,
closing piece?
um, yeah, I think that, I say like looking at it through like a racial lens, and anti-racism work is healing work in so much as it demands us to begin looking at these things. And yes, it is going to be uncomfortable, uh, but that you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that finding that community of people to do it with is so helpful, because again, like we are beings that um, desire that belonging and that connection,
Mm-hmm.
and um, having that community is part of it. And so, if you don't know where to start, if you don't have that community, you are more than welcome to come and join Moms Against Racism. We have a community. We're doing these kinds of conversations and learning all of the time. Um, and we would love to see you.
And we will link
Mm.
how to access you in the show notes. Do you want to say once out loud how the best way for people to connect?
Yes, and best way to find us is through our website, and it's just momsagainstracism.ca.
Awesome. Thank you, Kerry. I really appreciate you being here, and I highly suggest everyone I looked up your name in Spotify and was able to listen to so many of your interviews. They all pop up. So I suggest everyone do that as well. And yeah, we're so grateful for you and all the work that you're doing.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.